Hello and welcome back to a special mini-sode of the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. And we're a little discombobulated. Amy's traveling, so she's doing this from the road. God love her. And we're not doing our usual intro and outro music because we felt that this was just so important that we wanted to kind of drop this in to the mix. We always try to stay relevant. And Amy, thanks for making the time from your travels to be on the show.
Of course, this is very exciting. Like, there's not a ton that happens with what we do where it's like breaking news, you know?
Oh, I know.
So I feel like we just need to jump on it whenever we get a chance.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of breaking news. So the heart of this podcast, the topic of this podcast is Apple's new iOS update, which is coming in September. And Apple is really taking a stance against privacy. And there was an update recently. If you have an iOS, if you're on an Apple phone, and even if you're not, I'll tell you why this is gonna matter to you. But there was an update recently where it was really guarding your privacy. So you may have noticed that when you went onto Facebook or Instagram or any app that normally tracks you, where you could give the app permission or not give it permission to track you. So Apple's really grinding these apps into submission in terms of privacy. But now Apple is looking at newsletters. So if you have a newsletter, and even if you don't, and this is why I wanted to drop in this episode now, so you have a little bit of time, Apple is going to take away the ability for you to track newsletter opens.
Sorry. And not that I didn't know what we were talking about, but just hearing it like that just is like, sorry.
Well, because, when Amy, you manage our newsletter, you go through it every few months and you pull people off who haven't opened.
Absolutely.
The newsletter, and your ability to do that is going to go away effective in September with this update. Now, before everybody starts panicking, not everybody updates their Apple devices, whether it's a phone or a tablet, immediately. I think that Facebook noted that only like a sixth of Apple users upgrade or upgraded during the last update within the first months of its release. So this is going to be a gradual thing, but it's really going to mess with your data. So if you're, when I get on the phone and I talk to authors who have who have a newsletter, I always ask them what their open rate is, right? And this is really going to mess with those numbers because depending on how many Apple users that you have that get your newsletter, you're going to see some of this data come through from Android still, but the Apple data is going to eventually go away. And Android is probably also going to crack down on this. So if you think, well, my Android people are safe and, whatever, eventually the Android folks are going to get, they're going to end up with this same, because privacy is such a big deal, as it should be. One of the reasons that we wanted to do this podcast is not just because, and we're going to try to keep this really short because there aren't a lot of answers to what you can do, because I think that newsletter companies like Constant Contact and Send and Blue, et cetera, I think that they're going to, they've been sort of hit with this news. They're going to create new metrics for you, but I don't know how accurate they're going to be, because if you can't track open rates, that's going to be a problem. You still will be able to track links. So if you have links in your newsletter and somebody clicks on them, you're going to be able to track those, but you're not going to be able to see how many people are opening your newsletter. So doing subject line testing and all of that is going to go away. And it occurred to me, Amy, my From Book to Bestseller, which is now in its, 500th copy edit or whatever it feels like. I'm going to have to redo that chapter because now the newsletter chapter is like outdated already. Thanks. And the book's not even published. Thank you, Apple. I appreciate you so much. So here's what you can do now. And this is something I think, Amy, we should do on our newsletter too, is encourage people to whitelist you, right? So start communicating with your newsletter. If you have a newsletter, start communicating with your newsletter. Make sure that you're whitelisted, because now, like Google and all of these different apps, they have these new metrics that throw you into different folders that and you may not see the email. So the first thing is make sure that your spam filters know that you're getting an email, that that your consumers, rather, spam filters, that your readers spam filters are not filtering out your newsletter, right? And you can do that, maybe put up a blog post on whitelisting, reference it in your newsletter, certainly. But if you were thinking that you wanted to do some newsletter building, now is the time to do it. I would recommend late August, start planning your newsletter building to get those numbers up, but really start to send out, like if you've been sitting on your newsletter for a while and you haven't been sending it regularly, start to send it regularly so that you can see how many people open and you can get that data before it all goes away. So building your newsletter is going to be really crucial. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to get this Minisode up so quickly, because these are things that you can be doing, in July and August, building up your newsletter and sending out your newsletter and making sure that people are, checking what your open rate is, starting to clean out your newsletter, because I don't know how, keeping your newsletter clean is part of not paying for people who don't open your newsletter, but it's also just part of what you do to continually increase your open rate. So that's part of what you have to do to keep your open rates. And it also helps with getting newsletters delivered into people's inboxes and things like that. And all of that's going to start to go away. And just know that we're going to stay on top of this. So we'll have another episode as we start to figure out newsletter companies start to figure out how they're going to do their reporting, how this is going to change. We'll have some new information. But right now, if you're thinking of starting a newsletter, now is a really good time. If you have a newsletter you haven't sent out in a while, start to schedule those issues, get those out. Make sure that your folks are whitelisting you, make sure that, and, start to experiment with using links in your newsletter to see how many link clicks that you get. But it's really kind of depressing, actually, because it's going to make, you're not going to be able to see. So previously, like, you could experiment with different subject lines and see which one got a better open. And that is just completely going to go away. I'm a little overwhelmed with this. I'll have to be honest. I know. I'm sorry. But
it's so smart. Like, it does make sense to plan now, because we talk about newsletters all the time. And we've been pushing it a lot on the podcast lately. So I think hopefully a lot of people have been paying attention and have started taking next steps. So if you're doing that, see it through.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're doing that, see it through. Newsletters are not going to go away. They are absolutely not going to go away. And I think that it would be an interesting, as we start to get closer to September, to the next iOS update, it's going to be interesting to kind of see what other people are doing, what some of these bigger companies are doing, because they are equally as impacted. Some of these big places that send out, like, an Old Navy comes to mind, because it seems like they send out newsletters every 5 minutes, but they're not going to be able to know how well their campaigns did. I mean, this is a real problem. But there's nothing that we can really do about it. And like I said, I think it's going to migrate over to Android. Just get started with that newsletter. Do everything you can until these data points go away in September. But remember that not everybody's going to update right away, because, like, my mother's, and this is maybe a bad example, my mother's iPad, I don't know, I think she still has the old iOS update. So not everybody updates immediately, but the people who do, you're going to lose those numbers, and it's going to completely skew the remainder of what you have. So it's going to be it's going to get really interesting. I think it's going to be something. I mean, Amy, we'll have, like I said, we'll have to look at that for our newsletter, but it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves.
Yeah. And I think we'll definitely do another Minisode once we've done some testing with ours too, to give you guys some tips or anything that we've learned.
Yeah, because we're definitely going to take a look at that between now and in July and August, before this new update drops. But like I said, get on your newsletter, start doing all the things that you wanted to do that you've been putting off. Now is really the time. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell, and this was a special, unedited, no music drop-in Minisode that we hope you really enjoy. Bye-bye.